Welcome to Moving People Forward with Mark Elfstrand. This program is a series of conversations on commonly seen challenges in everyday people's lives. We hope you'll be inspired by the stories you hear today. Perhaps you know of someone who would also benefit. Be sure to share the program link with a friend. Now, here's Mark.
And welcome to Moving People Forward. My guest today is a man whose life on earth, could have very well ended just a couple of years ago. It's a story that we're going to be hearing in just a couple of moments. Dr. Hutz Hertzberg is the president of Christian Heritage Academy. He previously served as the president of Christian Union, working to develop transformative Christian leaders. He also previously worked with the Orchard Network, developing next-generation pastors and lay leaders. And for 7 years, he served as the executive pastor at the historic Moody Church in downtown Chicago. Dr. Hertzberg has also served in higher education, administrative and faculty positions, also as an interim senior pastor and as a chaplain. And Dr. Hutz Hertzberg, welcome.
Thank you so much. Really been looking forward to being with you.
Well, this is quite a storied history you have. Most of your life, it seems like, has been affiliated in ministry in one capacity or another. So maybe you could just start by talking a little bit about your faith story.
Well, interestingly, you're exactly right. All of my working adult life has been in Christian ministry, for which I'm so grateful for. But I didn't grow up in a Christian home, also interestingly. My folks were God-believing folks and very hardworking, disciplined, grew up during the Depression. But my father was of Jewish heritage, not really of a practicing Jewish faith at all. My mother was Protestant, but really not what we would understand as a personal relationship with the Lord. And so I was really, by God's grace, the first person in my family to become a Christian just before my freshman year in high school. Then I got very involved with a group called the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, FCA, and that was very transformative in my early Christian development. Had a coach at the high school that really took interest in me, brought me to a good church, and that began my journey at the church. My Sunday school teacher brother worked at a college called Wheaton College, and when I went in to see her and asked her where I should go to college, she said, "Did you know that there's one of the finest Christian liberal arts colleges in our backyard?" And I said, "No, tell me about it." She said, "It's Wheaton College, and I think that's where you should go." And so that set my college trajectory, which is where I ended up. And that also was very transformative in my Christian development.
Let's talk about Christian Heritage Academy. And just tell me a little bit about the school and its history.
Yes, Christian Heritage Academy is located in Northfield, Illinois, northern suburb in Chicagoland. And it was founded 36 years ago by Dr. Wayne Grudem. That's a name that some of your listeners will know. Dr. Grudem taught at Trinity up in Deerfield for 20 years. He's now down at Phoenix Seminary for the last almost 20. And he and a group of 4 or 5 other families felt that there was a great void for Christian education in the northern suburbs of Chicago 36 years ago. And so they started a fledgling little group of families, and that has grown into, 36 years later, over 400 students. We draw from 170 different congregations, from Kenosha, Wisconsin to downtown Chicago, all the way out west past Barrington. So we have quite a reach, and so grateful that parents make an incredible sacrifice financially, geographically, to be a part of our school.
Well, students, no doubt, are having to process an incredible world change in just 2020 alone, both with the arrival of the pandemic and also, of course, the more recent developments with racial injustice. Just give me your thoughts on the way that maybe you're hearing that students are trying to deal with this.
Yeah, I think, that varies from age group. We're pre-K 3 all the way to 12th grade. And so there's a lot of range there. But there's no doubt what you said is absolutely correct, Mark. Students are processing this. Parents are processing it. And, of course, we're processing it as leaders. But we really see God's hand at work in all of this. Between the pandemic, between the economic challenges, and now the social unrest. It's hard not to see God's hand at work in what's happening. And we just don't want to miss what it is that he's trying to show us. And we, even as recently as last night, had the opportunity, I did, to challenge our parents and faculty and staff that let us not miss this opportunity. Let us not miss what it is that the Lord is trying to show us. And I turn to Joel chapter 2, where the prophet Joel is calling the people of God back to himself in brokenness and repenting and mourning and fasting and weeping. And I believe that there's real similar need in our day right now for the church, for Christians, to return to the Lord with all of our hearts.
Well, on June 23rd, 2018, we're just a couple of years away from that date. You were with a couple of members of your family. You were preparing to travel out of Midway Airport, and your world took a mighty turn. Tell us the story.
Yes, that is a day that I'll never forget, and it's almost 2 years to the day that day happened. And it's a day that since that time I have not yet forgot to thank the Lord for what he did on that day. I fly a fair amount, and so that was not unusual. Did all the things leading up to a trip. I went to my office. I went to the post office, the bank. I loaded the car. We drove from the northern suburbs to Midway Airport. We dropped off our bags. We parked the car. Went into through TSA, went up to the chapel at Midway Airport. I continue to give oversight to the Protestant Chapel Ministry at Chicago O'Hare and Midway Airports, which is a story in itself. Talked to the chaplains just before the service. Came down. The big question for my wife and daughter and I was, we're going to use the bathrooms there right below the chapel or closer to our gate. We had time. We weren't under stress, rush at that point. We decided to use the ones right underneath the chapel there at Midway Airport, if maybe some of your listeners know where that is. And I talking to the janitor, washing my hands, and in that 1 second when I turn to dry my hands and he goes into the janitor's closet, I hit the deck. I'm in full cardiac arrest, no pulse, no breathing, turning blue, stiff as a board, and that's when things got really, really serious, to say the least.
So the person that was in the men's room then, was he the one that quickly called for help?
Yeah, great question. And by the way, everything I just shared with you, I have no memory of. Everything that I did that morning that I just laid out for you, I have no memory of any of that.
Wow.
But the janitor, actually, bless his heart, he kind of he got paralyzed, and he grabbed a roll of toilet paper and stuck it under my head. But no, Mark, it was a 10-year-old little girl who, and where in God's providence, so much, this is all God's providence, but where I collapsed was in the entryway to the restroom. So folks could see me from the concourse, and people are walking up and down, and they see a man down, they see the janitor at my head. But this little 10-year-old girl has the wherewithal to run and get help. And so she runs, sees a police officer, says there's a man down in the bathroom, but then she runs down to the USO lounge, and her dad is in the USO lounge, and who's a former EMT with the military, now working with Compassion International out in Colorado. They happen to be in the USO lounge, and he's the first one on the scene. But Mark, the story gets even more interesting than there. They weren't even scheduled to be at the airport that day. They get to Raleigh-Durham. They have a nonstop flight to Denver. They get to the airport, and the airline says, sorry, your flight is canceled. The only way that we can get you home today is to route you through Chicago. Sorry, you have a 2-hour layover. They weren't even scheduled to be in the airport that day.
What a providential piece. We need to take a time out here, and then we're going to continue the story, because you had other dramatic circumstances that developed in the midst of this, and I can't wait to hear the rest of that story. So let me just let those who are watching or are listening to us know that my guest on Moving People Forward is Dr. Hutz Hertzberg, president of Christian Heritage Academy. And again, his life could have very well ended just a couple of years ago, but by God's providence, he is here with us today. We'll have more coming up in just a moment.
God is our safe place and our strength. He is always our help when we are in trouble. This word of God in Psalm 46:1 says it all. God is our safe place. He is our strength. He is our help when we are in trouble. Whenever and wherever we are invited, nationally or internationally, Lutheran Church Charity's mission is to bring the mercy, compassion, presence, and proclamation of Jesus Christ to those who are suffering and in need. LCC is a ministry of presence, to be present with Jesus, to lift up people in times of joy and sorrow, in prayer, and by passing through donations of dollar per dollar to those in need. Through our canine ministries, we respond and deploy with boots on the ground and paws within 24 hours, often sooner, of any crisis or disaster situation we're invited into. Our LCC disaster response teams continue our support, both financially and with our dedicated volunteers, for those communities during their long-term recovery and efforts, which can be years. Disaster response teams also train volunteers through our alert training to equip volunteers to respond to the various types of disasters. LCC's human care ministries work through our churches and pastors to provide financial and in-kind donations, people resources, and emotional and spiritual care. We have strong partnerships with churches and Christian ministries across the U.S. and internationally. You see, for us, the bottom line is making a difference by being present. For people who are suffering and in need with that mercy, compassion, presence of Jesus Christ. Thank you again for allowing us the privilege to stand alongside and serve others. Jesus and your partnership make that possible to touch thousands of lives.
This is Moving People Forward. I'm Mark Elfstrand. Thank you for joining us. My guest is Dr. Hutz Hertzberg, who is the president of Christian Heritage Academy. Just 2 years ago, on June 23rd to 2018, his life almost ended at Midway Airport when he went into full cardiac arrest. He's been sharing that story. So, all right, so we know that this one family was there providentially. What other acts of God, so to speak, happened to keep you going?
Well, it truly is all an act of God. The second person on the scene, and keep in mind, this is all happening almost on top of each other. The little girl sees me after I've been down for I don't know how long, but I'm already turning blue. There's no pulse. There's no breathing. I'm in a contorted position, stiff as a board. And this little girl runs for help. Her dad is the first one on the scene. The second person on the scene is an Army veteran, nurse, male nurse. He has a prosthetic leg. He's in town for a conference. He told us later that I never get to the airport early. I cut it as close as I can, but today he arrives 4 hours early. He said, I don't know why I got to the airport early. He comes out of TSA. He's facing the men's room, sees a little commotion. He asks, they need help. And the first man says, yes, absolutely. And so that man, the second man on the scene, big, strong guy, 275 pounds. He starts doing compression, CPR on me. The third person on the scene is a gal who is not even flying. In fact, the next two were not even flying. This gal is a full-time RN, and she went to see her sister's daughter off, who just graduated from Navy boot camp. But they had been at the graduation the day before. They're driving back to Ohio, and they're way past Midway Airport. And she said, I just really feel like we need to see my niece again. And so they turn the car around on the expressway, get to the airport. She gets a pass, which is not easy to do in these days, to get behind security because she's not flying.
Right.
And she then is the third person on the scene, and she's the one that's doing the mouth to mouth. And then there's a fourth person that jumps in, and she also was not flying. She was also there to see a loved one off. She works as an emergency room nurse from 4 different states. So you got 4 people that are working on me from 4 different states. She's the one that does the AED. She knows what she's doing. There's the AED box was not too far away, fortunately, and they end up shocking me a couple of times. They estimate that somewhere between anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, I was without pulse or breath. And it was a very, very serious situation, obviously.
Did they expect you to lose some of your faculties if you would recover from this?
Great question. Yes, the answer to that is yes. Fast forwarding a little bit, my wife and daughter are now at the hospital, and I can tell you that story. But they're preparing her, saying that it's quite likely that he will have both physical and mental deficiencies. It's just normal when you don't have oxygen for that long, you don't have circulation. And so they were preparing her, and when I was in intensive care and unconscious and had everything hooked up to me, there was a faint pulse, so I was still there, but they just were not real hopeful that I would have all my faculties if I did live. And by God's grace, I do have all my faculties, I believe. So thankful for that.
Yeah, your wife and daughter must have been in terror land, though, while all this is going on.
They go into the women's restroom, and again, we, unlike sometimes when you're kind of rushed and stressed at the airport, we had time, and so they did a visit to the women's room. They come out and they see a little commotion around the men's room. And by that time, there was 4 or 5 people there. That there was police officers kind of forming another little ring of folks and blocking people off. And my wife just happens to see my shoe, and she said, that looks like Dad's shoe. And then she got closer and realized it was me. And so she wisely, she saw a family sitting across the way. She asked them to keep our daughter, to shield her from what was taking place. And Lynn then quickly identified herself as my wife, and she began praying that the Lord would spare me in front of all these folks as they were working on me. And so, yes, it was a total shock. That's the last thing they were thinking. I interestingly, I had a cardio stress test 3 months to the day earlier, just as part of a complete physical, passed with flying colors. There was no sign of anything. I've had no heart issues all my life. I've been fortunate that way. And so there was nothing to indicate that I, would be experiencing that. And so on the way to the hospital, a police officer took her following the ambulance. And the ambulance, if we had to wait for the ambulance, I wouldn't be talking to you today. They got caught in traffic. They went to the wrong entrance.
Oh my God.
They just weren't there very quickly. And so fortunately, these other good Samaritans were the ones that the Lord used to keep me alive, Mark. And but now Lynn is following in the police car with our daughter. And you'll appreciate this. Our 9-year-old daughter says to my wife, is Dad going to die? And Lynn said, he will only die if this is a day that the Lord has appointed for him to die. And so we get to McNeil Hospital, never even heard of McNeil Hospital. It's now my favorite hospital. And they did an amazing job. But there, to answer your question, yes, they were prepping her that if I do survive, it could be a very, very long road. And don't expect that I'll be the same person when I come to.
We only have just a couple of minutes left, but you had a reunion with this a team of people that helped you out. Was it last year?
It was exactly 1 year to the date. That's an incredible part of the story. I wish we had more time to tell you that, but about 6 months after the event, the president of the hospital got wind of what had taken place at her hospital, and what a wonderful story. They get so much bad news in the hospital, but she brought me in and had me address the entire staff of the hospital, 150 people, all the ones that were able to get away from their shifts. But there was doctors, and there was board members, and there was residents, and they were filled the room. And I remember telling the president, I said, President McCreary, I really don't believe I can tell the story without talking about the Lord. And she said, I want you to talk about the Lord. So I had that opportunity, but then 6 months later, God put it on her heart, apparently, to reconvene the Good Samaritans. And so as much of as a miracle that they were all there at the airport 2 years ago to save my life, it was almost as much of a miracle that all of them with their families were able to come in for a weekend at the expense of McNeil Hospital. They had a special dinner for us at the LaGrange Country Club on Saturday night. And then on Sunday, we had a press conference. She said, I don't know if any of the news media will be here. We just don't know who's going to come. And there was a lot of other stuff going on in Chicago that weekend. And but they were all there, 2, 5, 7, 9, WBBM. They were all there for the press conference. They all played it at 5, 6, and 10 that night. And then we had a celebration service, and I preached on the parable of the Good Samaritan. And again, there's a bunch of medical folks there, the emergency room doctor, beautiful Muslim lady who did an amazing job. Other doctors and nurses were there, as well as our visitors and our friends and guests that we had. And then they had a beautiful reception for us. And so it was quite a weekend. And this was all because the president was just so drawn to this story of what took place a year earlier.
Now, as we wrap up, I think I read that at least for a period of time, at 1:37 in each afternoon I don't know how long you've done this, you've taken a moment to just thank the Lord that he extended your life.
Yeah, Mark, that's exactly true. We did that for the first year. But like I said at the very beginning, there's not a day that goes by before I was speaking with you this morning, that I was on my knees thanking the Lord that he's given me more time on this earth for the opportunity to serve him. And I don't want to waste it. I don't want to not be grateful for it. I want to maximize this time that the Lord's given me. And I always felt like I lived with purpose. And so it wasn't like this dramatic change of focus in my life. But you can't go through an experience like this and realize that every day is a gift. You know that. You say it often. And life is precious. And I just want to live in light of God's great mercy and grace and do all that I can in living for him in the time that he gives me.
Well, the faculty, the staff, and the students at Christian Heritage Academy are blessed to have you in that position of leadership. And I don't know what fall is going to bring for you, but I'm sure you've got a lot of discussions going on right now. We'll just pray for wisdom as to how to take the next steps to help these kids advance in life. So.
Great. Well, everything is absolutely true. We're dependent on the Lord. He gave us wisdom as we moved into an e-learning situation very, very quickly. Yeah. The challenge is that all the guidance is not clear in terms of what the fall is going to look like. So multiple scenarios that we're planning for. But we're looking to the Lord. We trust that he'll give us the wisdom as we move forward.
Well, thanks so much for being willing to share a very dramatic, powerful story about your life. And we'll just pray that God will give you many more days on this earth to do what you do best, which is to encourage others in leadership. So thanks so much today.
Thank you, Mark. Great to be with you. Appreciate the opportunity.
My guest today on Moving People Forward has been Dr. Hutz Hertzberg. You can look up his name and find out all kinds of information about this story online. He is the president of Christian Heritage Academy. As the sages have told us, grow in wisdom, think humbly of yourself, and love one another. May it be so with you. Join us more next time for Moving People Forward. I'm Mark Elfstrand.